I'm Angela Carter, 28 years old, and I've spent my entire life chasing a dream. The kind of dream that fills you with hope, even when the world seems to tell you it's impossible. The kind of dream that starts with something as simple as a book and a cup of coffee. But that dream, my family didn't care about it. My mother, my father, and my sister, all of them stayed home while I spent my grand opening night alone in my cafe chapter and chai cleaning up after a day that should have been the proudest moment of my life. It didn't matter how much I worked, how much I sacrificed, or how much love I poured into this place. They chose Bella's promotion party over me. And when I saw my mother's text, "We need to discuss the book Café," that was the last straw. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever worked your hardest and still felt like it wasn't enough. I've always been a dreamer. Ever since I was a little girl growing up in Portland, Oregon, I found comfort in the pages of books. Whether I was curled up in a corner of the school library or lost in a novel late into the night, books were my refuge. I would read to escape, to find a world that felt like it was made just for me. Somewhere in those pages, I found a piece of myself. And it was there in those quiet hours that the idea for my cafe was born. I didn't want to just open another coffee shop. I wanted a space where people could find a warm drink dive into a good book and forget the world for a while. But turning that dream into reality, it took more than just passion. It meant working part-time jobs to pay the bills first at the school library, then as a barista in a local cafe while saving every penny I could. I enrolled in basic management classes at a community center to learn how to run a business, how to budget, negotiate leases, and secure operating permits. There were many nights I sat in my tiny apartment staring at spreadsheets, wondering if I was crazy. Everyone around me seemed to be building stable careers, yet here I was pouring everything into a dream that felt like a far-off fantasy. Still, each time I stepped into the library surrounded by those rows of books, I knew I had to try. And so after years of hard work, I finally found a spot in Capitol Hill, an old bakery that had been vacant for months. It was the perfect location with large windows that looked out over a quiet tree-lined street. I spent months renovating, painting, putting up shelves, picking the perfect light fixtures. Every detail mattered. I called it Chapter and Chai, a place where every visit would feel like opening a new chapter in a story, and the sweet aroma of chai tea would draw people in. I sent out invitations to my family for the grand opening, hoping they'd finally show up and see what I had worked so hard to build. I thought that maybe, just maybe, this time they'd be proud of me. But instead, my family, my mother, my father, and my sister didn't even bother to reply. Bella, my younger sister, was too busy with her promotion at work, and my parents didn't even bother to offer an explanation. I went through the motions opening the cafe, greeting customers, and filling the space with the warmth I had always imagined. But every time I looked at the door hoping to see them walk in, the emptiness grew heavier. And when I checked my phone, I saw the photo of Bella standing proudly with my parents at her promotion party, smiling, surrounded by relatives I hadn't seen in years. That was the moment I realized, no matter what I did, it would never be enough for them. This dream wasn't for them. It was for me. But as I cleaned up at the end of the night, my heart heavy, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. Tomorrow I would finally confront them. And this time, I would stand up for myself and my dream. But as I prepared to face my family, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. The day after the grand opening, I woke up feeling a weight on my chest, one that didn't seem to lift even as I moved through my routine. I should have been filled with joy. This was my dream come true after all. But instead, all I could think about was the empty chairs at the front of the cafe, the ones I had reserved for my family. I had believed deep down that once they saw my hard work and vision come to life, they would finally understand me, that they would be proud. But when I checked my phone the night before, I saw the picture of Bella standing tall in her shimmering dress, her promotion certificate in hand with my parents smiling proudly beside her. There they were in the spotlight, while I was left standing alone in the shadow of my own dreams. I tried to focus on the cafe, on the customers who walked in and out with smiles, but every time the door opened, I couldn't help but look, hoping to see a familiar face walk in, but they never did. The day passed in a blur, smiling at new faces, making lattes, organizing books on the shelves. But every time I glanced at my phone, that image of my family celebrating Bella's achievement stuck in my mind. I had worked so hard for this moment, but no one seemed to care. Not one word of congratulations from my parents, not a single text from Bella. My heart sank with every minute that passed, yet I still found myself hoping, waiting for them to show up, for them to acknowledge the milestone I had reached. By mid-afternoon, the cafe was full. A group of office workers came in for a quick coffee break, chatting and laughing, their laptops open, the smell of roasted beans filling the air. I overheard a teacher telling me that my waffles were better than the famous bakery down the street, a compliment that should have made me proud. And yet it only made the absence of my family feel louder. I kept glancing at the table near the window where I had hoped they would sit, but it remained empty, just like my heart. When the clock struck 3:00 p.m., I heard the buzz of my phone in my pocket. I pulled it out, hoping for a message, a congratulations, something, anything. Instead, I opened the family group chat and my stomach dropped. There on the screen was a photo of Bella, my parents standing proudly beside her at her promotion party. They looked so happy. And below the photo, my mother had written, "So proud of you, Bella." 3 heart emojis. It was like a slap in the face. My own family had chosen to celebrate Bella's success, while my cafe, my lifelong dream, went unnoticed. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it all. I had done everything for them, always hoping they would see me, hoping they would finally acknowledge my efforts. But now I saw the truth. It wasn't about my dream. It wasn't about me at all. To them, I was just the background, the one who would always come second. I forced myself to keep smiling at the customers who continued to pour in, but the ache inside me only grew. As the day wore on and the last customers left, I slowly started to clean up, stacking chairs and wiping down tables, the silence in the cafe heavy. The once cozy space now felt empty, not just physically but emotionally. The cake I had made for my family still sat untouched in the fridge, waiting for people who never showed up. I pulled down the glass door with a quiet click, locking up for the night. The Seattle rain had softened to a fine mist, and I stepped outside, letting the cold air hit my face. I should have felt proud. I should have felt like I had accomplished something huge. But instead, I felt completely alone. I couldn't stop thinking about the message from my mom. "Angela, we need to discuss the book Café. No congratulations, no kind words, nothing to acknowledge the day that was supposed to be about me." I stood there, phone in hand, rereading the message over and over, hoping it would change. But it didn't. My mom had always been distant, but this was different. It felt cold, transactional. She wasn't proud of me. She wasn't even remotely interested in my success. That night I sat in my small apartment, staring out the window. The city lights blurred in the rain, but all I could focus on was the reality I had been trying to ignore for years. I had spent so much of my life seeking validation from my family, from my mother's approval, from my father's silent acceptance, from Bella's acknowledgement. And now I realized something: no matter how much I achieved, they would never see me. They would never truly see me. The girl who had spent nights dreaming of this cafe, working tirelessly to make it real, was still invisible to them. And so as I sat in the silence of my apartment, I made a choice. I would no longer wait for their approval. I wouldn't keep pouring my heart into something that only brought me rejection. I would confront them once and for all. But this time, it wouldn't be to plead for their recognition. It would be to stand tall and show them that I was more than just the girl they ignored. I was Angela Carter, and I had built Chapter and Chai with my own 2 hands. I knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy. I knew my family wouldn't suddenly change their ways. But for the first time in my life, I felt ready. Ready to face them, ready to prove that I could do this without their support, without their validation. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I was ready to take control of my life and my dream. As I packed my bag with the papers and plans for the cafe, I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't the little girl anymore seeking approval. I was a woman standing on her own. And whatever happened next, I knew I wouldn't go back to being invisible. The truth was out there, and it was time for my family to see it. Tomorrow, I would confront them. and for the first time in my life, I wouldn't be asking for their approval. I would be demanding the respect I deserved. The day of the meeting felt like a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I knew what was coming, but nothing could prepare me for the flood of emotions that washed over me as I walked up to my parents' house that evening. The rain had started again, soft at first, then picking up in intensity just like my nerves. My hands felt clammy as I gripped the strap of my bag, the folder inside it full of my hard work. I had spent so many sleepless nights gathering my documents, my business plan, the permits, the invoices, all the proof I needed to show them that I wasn't a child anymore, that this cafe wasn't just some pipe dream. I had built it from the ground up, piece by piece, and I wasn't going to let them tear it down. I stood in front of their house for a moment, just looking at it. It was the same as it had always been, with its neat lawn and perfect rose bushes, but tonight everything felt different. I wasn't the same girl who used to run in and out of this house, seeking validation, only to be met with silence. No, tonight, I was someone else. I wasn't here to ask for approval. I was here to set a boundary, to show them I was no longer seeking their permission to exist as my own person. When I rang the doorbell, I could already feel the familiar tension in the air. The door opened, and there stood my mother. Her face was expressionless, as it always was, but tonight it felt colder. She didn't even greet me with a smile. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let me in, her voice flat and almost rehearsed. I could hear Bella in the next room laughing, as always. She had that same smug smile on her face, the one that always made me feel small, like I was invisible. I walked into the living room, and there they were, my mother, my father, and Bella. My father sat at the head of the table reading glasses perched on his nose. He barely looked up when I entered. Bella, on the other hand, was sitting cross-legged in a chair holding a glass of red wine, her eyes sharp, sizing me up. I didn't let it shake me. I set the folder down on the table right in front of my mother and took my seat. My father cleared his throat first, pushing the pile of papers toward me. "We've looked into the data," he said, his voice soft but firm. 80% of small cafes fail within the first 5 years. He slid the charts across the table, the bright neon markers emphasizing the risks. My heart sank as I glanced over the figures. It was all the same, nothing new, just more statistics meant to undermine me. I took a deep breath, holding back the frustration that was rising inside me. "I know the risks," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I've done everything to make this work. I've spent years preparing for this moment." I looked directly at my mother, whose cold eyes watched me with little interest. I wasn't asking for their approval anymore. I was telling them what I had done and what I was going to do. My mother, however, wasn't listening. She took a sip of water, then slowly placed her glass down. "Angela," she said, her tone flat, "we think you should fold Chapter and Chai into the family LLC. That way it'll be safer under the family umbrella. Bella will handle the marketing, finances, and partnerships. You can take care of the daily operations, the books, and the events." She paused, watching me closely. "You can keep the name, but we'll need to make a few changes. It will be called Heart & Co. Books and Brews. It sounds more professional. It carries the family brand." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. The words were like a slap in the face. They didn't see Chapter and Chai for what it was, a piece of me, my hard work, my dream. They saw it as a project they could control, something that could be neatly tucked under their umbrella. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," I said firmly. "I won't do that." I looked my mother straight in the eye. "Chapter and Chai is mine. I'm not folding it into some family business just to make it more safe. This is my dream, and I'm not letting anyone take it from me." The room fell silent. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I could feel Bella's eyes on me, her lips pressed into a tight line. My mother didn't say anything for a long moment, but I could see the irritation building in her. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me. Finally, she spoke. "Angela," she said, her voice tinged with something colder than before. "This is a foolish risk. You've spent all this time trying to prove something to yourself, but it's not going to work. You need to listen to us. We only want what's best for you." She leaned forward, her voice lowering. "If you don't let us help you, you will regret it." I could feel the familiar sting of those words, the ones I had heard so many times growing up. "You'll regret it." The words I had come to dread, the words that always felt like a trap, a way for them to control my choices. But this time I wasn't afraid. This time I wouldn't back down. I looked at my mother, then at Bella, whose expression was one of quiet triumph. She didn't say anything, but her eyes spoke volumes. It was clear she had already claimed victory in her mind. "No," I repeated, my voice stronger this time. "I'm not doing it your way. This is my business, my dream. I've worked for this. I won't let anyone take that away from me." Bella let out a short, mocking laugh. "You really think you can do this on your own? You don't know anything about business. You're just playing at it." Her words were like knives, but I didn't let them pierce me. I met her gaze steady and unflinching. "I know more than you think," I said, quietly, refusing to let the anger show in my voice. "I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not here to beg for approval. I've built this from the ground up, and I'm not asking for your help. Not anymore." I could feel my heart racing, my hands trembling slightly, but I refused to show weakness. I had made my choice, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. My mother's face grew colder, her lips tight with frustration. But my father, for the first time in years, spoke up. "Enough, Elaine," he said, his voice quiet but firm. My mother blinked, taken aback, as he continued. "She's made her decision." For a brief moment his eyes met mine, and I saw something there, something I hadn't seen before, maybe even a hint of support. But before I could react, my mother stood up, her chair scraping across the floor. "You're too stubborn, Angela," she snapped. "If you fail, don't come crawling back to us." She stormed out of the room, leaving the three of us in a heavy silence. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm that was rising inside me. I stood up, gathered my folder, and slipped it into my bag. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I wasn't afraid anymore. This was my life, my dream. No one was going to take it from me, not my mother, not Bella, and not anyone else. As I walked to the door, Bella's voice cut through the silence. "You'll be begging for help soon enough," she said, her voice dripping with smugness. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I stepped out into the cold night air, the rain still falling softly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. The drive home was quiet, and the rain had started to pick up again, the windshield wipers rhythmically swiping away the water, matching the rhythm of my thoughts. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, but I didn't care. I wasn't afraid. I had just stood up to my family my entire life, and for the first time I felt like I had finally put a stop to the endless cycle of silence, disapproval, and neglect. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that house just a few hours ago. I couldn't help but replay the conversation over and over in my head. My mother's cold words, Bella's mocking tone. But my father, he had said something I hadn't expected. He had told her to stop. He had told her enough. It was such a small moment, but it felt like everything shifted in that one instant. I had always been the one waiting for their approval, looking for any sign that they saw me, that they cared. But in that moment, I realized that they might never change, and I had to stop waiting for them to. I wasn't sure what I had expected when I walked in there. Maybe an apology, some recognition of my hard work, a nod of support. But no. Instead, I had been hit with their cold, practical view of the world, the one that said dreams weren't worth pursuing if they didn't fit into their neatly planned boxes. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, but that's when I realized it wasn't just about the cafe anymore. It was about me. It was about my life, my path, my choices, and I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. That night I sat in the cafe alone after everyone had left. The place was quiet, almost eerily so. The lights flickered softly above the bookshelves, casting long shadows on the walls. For the first time since opening day, I didn't feel a sense of emptiness. Yes, my family had let me down, but something else had filled that space. A quiet strength had settled over me, the kind that comes from realizing that you don't need anyone else's validation to know you're on the right path. I had made it this far, and I was going to keep going. The next day, I dove back into the cafe with renewed energy. I had no idea what the future would hold, but I knew that I would do whatever it took to make this place work. I began brainstorming new ways to connect with the community. I couldn't just wait for people to come in anymore. I needed to create something that would keep them coming back, something beyond just a cup of coffee or a good book. That's when it hit me. I needed to build something bigger than the cafe, something that brought people together. I started planning weekly events, book club meetings, open mic nights, poetry readings. I knew that if I could create a space that people wanted to be a part of, they would keep coming back. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally replace that emptiness left by my family with something real. I posted about the events on social media, made flyers, and even reached out to some local authors and musicians. I had no idea how it would go, but I felt a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. That Friday night, I hosted the first open mic. I was nervous watching the clock tick closer to the start time, but when the first performer stepped up, something incredible happened. The room filled with energy, with laughter and applause. People sang, read poetry, and shared stories. I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about coffee or books. This was about creating a space where people could connect, share, and be seen. It wasn't perfect. Not everyone was a polished performer, and not everyone came with the intention of having their voices heard. But the atmosphere was something different. There was a warmth to it, a community forming in ways I hadn't expected. It was everything I had hoped for. I realized that while I had been waiting for my family's approval, the world outside my door was already giving me something far more valuable. The next week, I held my first book club meeting. We discussed Little Fires Everywhere, and the conversation flowed easily. The group was diverse, some college students, a few teachers, a few older people from the neighborhood. As we sat around the long table sharing our thoughts on the characters and themes, I felt a wave of pride wash over me. This was what I had wanted. A place where people could gather, find something to connect with, and walk away feeling like they belonged. Each event I hosted felt like a little victory. With every new connection, every smile, every repeat customer, I felt the walls of doubt slowly start to crumble. I wasn't alone. The cafe wasn't just a place where I worked, it had become a community, and I had built it. People were coming back not just for the coffee or the books, but for the feeling of being seen. And that was something I had never experienced with my family. But as I started to find success, I knew my family wasn't just going to let me go that easily. I wasn't naive. I had already seen their attempts to control my dream, and I knew it wasn't over yet. I was bracing myself for the next step, whatever it was going to be. But I also realized something. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I had spent too much of my life trying to fit into their expectations, trying to make them proud. But now I was finally living for myself. And no matter what they threw at me, I knew I was strong enough to stand on my own. As the weeks went on, things started to fall into place. I found new suppliers for the cafe, made partnerships with local businesses, and even began offering a discount for teachers and students. Slowly, I was turning the cafe into a place that not only offered great coffee and books, but also supported the community around it. One afternoon, just as I was getting ready to close, I got an email from a local journalist at Seattle Weekly. They wanted to feature Chapter and Chai in their Small Business Rising column. I couldn't believe it. My little cafe was about to get some serious exposure. I spent the next week getting everything ready for the interview and photo shoot, making sure every corner of the cafe was perfect. But I wasn't ready for what happened when Bella showed up. The days after that confrontation with my family felt like a strange mix of exhaustion and quiet determination. I had walked away from that table with my heart pounding, my hands shaking, but I knew deep down that I'd done the right thing. It wasn't just about standing up to them, it was about standing up for myself. And though I knew my family would never fully understand, I had finally given myself permission to stop seeking their approval. That night, I sat in the cafe after everyone had left, looking around at the space I had created. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the rain tapping on the windows. It felt like the cafe was whispering to me, reminding me that it was real, that it was mine. It was hard to explain the peace that came over me in that moment. Yes, my family had rejected me, but the cafe, it was more than a place to sell coffee. It was where I could finally breathe, finally be seen. And now I was going to make sure it stayed that way. The next morning, I sat down at the counter with a notebook, my mind buzzing with ideas. I couldn't just wait for people to stumble in. I needed to make Chapter and Chai something that the community could connect with, a place that wasn't just a business, but a space where people felt welcomed, a place that wasn't defined by anything other than its own heartbeat. So I started planning. I made a list of things I wanted to offer, events that would draw people in, create something beyond just the usual coffee shop. I had always loved the idea of book clubs, so I started reaching out to a few regulars who had come in during the opening week, asking them if they'd be interested. I didn't expect much, but when I posted on social media, to my surprise, people responded. They were excited. They wanted to be part of something. And just like that, it clicked. I wasn't in this alone. I had a community ready to support me. The first book club Wednesday came together surprisingly quickly. We chose Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, a book I had read months ago and loved. I printed a few posters, hung them on the windows, and posted an announcement online. I wasn't sure what to expect, but when the night came, more than 10 people showed up. They sat around the long table exchanging thoughts about the characters, the generational struggles, and the pressure of being the perfect child. As we discussed the book, I found myself feeling lighter, like I had finally found my place, the very thing I'd been searching for all these years. It wasn't just about coffee or books, it was about connection. The conversations didn't just happen during book club meetings. As I spent more time at the cafe, I noticed people returning. They'd come in for a coffee or a pastry and end up sitting at a table reading, chatting, or even just watching the rain. I began to realize that Chapter and Chai wasn't just a place where people came to grab a drink. It was a space where people could just be. I had created something that people needed, even if they didn't know it. They weren't just my customers, they were becoming my community. A week later, I hosted my first open mic Friday. I was nervous at first, unsure whether anyone would show up, but when I posted about it on social media, I was surprised by how many people expressed interest. Some were regulars from the cafe, others were new faces who had seen the flyer posted in a nearby bookstore. That night, I rearranged the space, set up a small stage in the corner, and waited. One by one, people came up to perform. There was a young woman who sang a song she had written, another who read a poem about the city, and even a couple who did an acoustic cover of a popular song. The whole room was buzzing with energy, and for the first time since I opened, I realized something: this wasn't just my dream anymore. It had become everyone's. It was a shared space, a place where anyone could come and express themselves. I stood behind the counter, wiping away tears as I watched the magic unfold in front of me. This was what I had wanted all along. The events continued to grow. I started hosting a few creative writing workshops for local high school students, offering a space where they could come together and develop their skills. I also reached out to a local bakery and asked if they'd be interested in selling their pastries at the cafe on weekends. To my surprise, they agreed, and the partnership quickly became a success. Slowly but surely, Chapter and Chai began to feel like more than just a cafe. It became a part of the community, a place where people could come to escape, to share, and to grow. I was learning too. As the cafe began to grow, I realized how much I still had to learn about running a business. Managing the finances, keeping up with inventory, and making sure everything ran smoothly wasn't easy. But with each day that passed, I became more confident. I learned to trust my instincts. I learned to set boundaries when I needed to. And most importantly, I learned that I didn't need my family's approval to succeed. I was doing this on my own, and I was doing it well. But even as things were beginning to fall into place, I knew I wasn't out of the woods yet. I had built a community, yes, but I could feel that my family wasn't finished with me. They weren't the type to let go easily. I had already seen their attempts to control my dream, and I knew they wouldn't just sit back and let me succeed. But this time, I wasn't afraid. This time, I knew that I could handle whatever came my way. That afternoon, as I was wiping down the counter and organizing a few books on the shelf, I got an email from a journalist at Seattle Weekly. They had heard about Chapter and Chai and wanted to feature it in their Small Business Rising column. I couldn't believe it. This was a huge opportunity. For the first time, I felt like the city was starting to take notice of what I had created. I spent the next week getting ready for the interview and photo shoot. I cleaned every corner of the cafe, replaced the flowers on the tables, and made sure everything looked perfect. But just as I was preparing, something unexpected happened. Bella walked in. The morning of the photo shoot was crisp, a light fog hanging in the air. I woke up early, my stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. The interview with Seattle Weekly was the first major step in getting Chapter and Chai recognized beyond Capitol Hill, and I was determined to make it perfect. I spent the whole morning cleaning and preparing the cafe, rearranging the bookshelves just a little more, making sure the lighting was soft but warm. I wanted the space to look like it felt cozy, welcoming a place where people could find something more than just a cup of coffee. I had been ready for this moment for weeks, and now it was finally here. I'd imagined what it would be like for months telling my story to a journalist, having my cafe featured in a column that highlighted small businesses. I was excited, but also terrified. I knew my family had seen the cafe starting to take shape, but I also knew they hadn't taken me seriously. This article wasn't just a milestone for the cafe, it was personal. It was a chance for me to show them and everyone else that I could do this on my own, that I didn't need their approval to succeed. As I was setting up, the door chime rang, and in walked Bella. I froze for a moment. My heart raced, and all that calm confidence I'd built up over the past few months seemed to leave me in an instant. I hadn't expected her to show up today, especially not with the photo shoot looming. Bella had always found ways to insert herself into things that didn't concern her, always trying to take over the spotlight. The last thing I wanted was for her to overshadow this moment that was supposed to be mine. "Hey, sis," she said, her voice smooth and sugary. She walked into the cafe as if it were her own personal runway, checking her reflection in the window as she passed. She was dressed in an expensive business outfit, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. I stood frozen for a moment, not sure how to respond. I had been preparing myself for this interview all week, and now here she was making it all about her. "I heard the reporter from Seattle Weekly is coming today." Bella continued, casually settling herself into a chair near the window. "I think it'll go better if I join you. I have marketing experience, you know." She pulled out her phone and started typing, as if she were the one about to be interviewed, checking her hair and making sure everything looked perfect. My chest tightened. I couldn't believe it. For months I had worked tirelessly to build this cafe, to make it something real. And now Bella, as always, was trying to insert herself into something that was never about her. I took a deep breath. I had already been down this road with her, constantly letting her take control. But not today. I had fought too hard for this, and I wasn't going to let her steal it from me. "Bella," I said, keeping my voice steady, "thank you for offering to help, but this interview is mine. Chapter and Chai belongs to me, and I'll be the one speaking for it." She froze her fingers, stopping mid-text. I saw the surprised look on her face, the shock that I had dared to set a boundary. For a second, I almost felt guilty for being so blunt, but then I reminded myself why I was doing this. I had spent years letting her walk all over me, but this time I wasn't backing down. She stood up, her face reddening. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "Journalists need someone who knows how to present a brand, how to speak to the media. You're just good at reading books and making coffee." I didn't flinch. "I'm sure. This is my voice, and I don't need anyone else to represent me. I've worked too hard for this to let someone else take the credit." The room went quiet. Bella stared at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. I didn't give in. I stood my ground, knowing that I wasn't just defending my cafe, I was defending myself. This was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away. As the reporter and photographer walked in, Bella stood there for a moment, her face flushed with embarrassment. She muttered something under her breath, grabbed her bag, and walked out of the cafe without another word. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time, I had stood up to her. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about me owning my space, my dream. And as I sat down with the reporter, I realized that this wasn't just an interview. It was a moment of change, a moment when I stopped waiting for approval and started embracing my own worth. The photo shoot went smoothly. I talked about the cafe, the community I was building, and how important it was to me to create a space where people could feel welcome and heard. The reporter seemed genuinely impressed by the events I'd hosted and the way the cafe had already become a gathering spot for so many in the neighborhood. When the interview was over, I felt a sense of accomplishment, a quiet pride I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. I had proven to myself that I could do this. I could stand on my own, and I didn't need anyone's approval to make my dream a reality. Later that evening, when the article was published, I couldn't believe my eyes. The headline read, "A New Haven in Capitol Hill, Angela Carter's Chapter in Chai." The photo showed me standing proudly in front of the bookshelves, my cafe glowing behind me. For the first time, I saw myself reflected in the world, not as the little girl seeking validation, but as the woman who had created something meaningful on her own. I knew my family had seen the article. They might not say anything, might not even acknowledge it, but it didn't matter. The truth was out there, and there was no way for them to ignore it now. But I also knew that this wasn't the end. I had finally taken control of my story, but the battle with my family was far from over. I could feel their presence lingering, the weight of their disapproval still hanging over me. They wouldn't stop trying to control my dream, but this time I wasn't afraid. The weeks following the article's publication were filled with a quiet kind of triumph. Chapter in Chai had started to gain the attention I had always hoped for. New customers came in every day, eager to see the place that had been featured in Seattle Weekly. The cafe was buzzing with life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. It was a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced with my family. And though they hadn't said a word about the article, it didn't matter. The community had spoken, and that was all that I needed. But as the cafe's popularity grew, so did the tension with my family. I had known it wouldn't be easy, but I hadn't expected them to escalate things in the way they did. It started with a barrage of fake reviews on Yelp and Google. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, 1 or 2 low-star ratings. But then it became clear. There were dozens of 1-star reviews, all from accounts with no history, all stating the same things: cold coffee, rude staff, dirty cafe. The comments seemed oddly coordinated, and it didn't take long for me to realize that someone was deliberately trying to tear down what I had built. I sat at my desk one morning scrolling through the reviews on my phone, my stomach sinking with every new negative comment. I knew the people writing these reviews had never set foot in my cafe, but still each word felt like a punch in the gut. I had worked so hard to create a space that was welcoming, and now it was being attacked in the most passive-aggressive way possible. I spent hours responding to each review, my fingers trembling as I typed. I kept my tone polite, professional, even thanking the reviewers for their feedback. But inside, I was furious. They weren't just attacking my business. They were trying to erase everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to let them get away with it, though. I wasn't just going to sit back and let my dream be ruined by a smear campaign. Later that week, I got a call from a regular customer, a high school teacher named Jamie. She was one of the first people to really support the cafe, always bringing her students by for writing workshops. Her voice was calm but concerned as she told me about the flood of negative reviews. "Don't worry, Angela," she said. "We all know what your cafe is really like. These reviews won't fool anyone." Her words gave me the strength I needed to keep going. But I also knew that if I was going to fight back, I needed more than just good intentions. I needed evidence. I started documenting everything: the fake reviews, the suspicious timing of their appearance, and the growing pattern of attacks. It wasn't long before I realized this was more than just petty jealousy. Someone wanted to destroy my business, and I was certain that someone was my family. My mother especially had never liked the idea of my cafe. She had always seen it as a risky venture, a foolish pursuit. Bella, too, had always seen it as a threat to her own success. I wasn't just building a cafe, I was building something that proved I could stand on my own without them. Then came the next blow. A few days after the reviews started flooding in, I received an anonymous complaint about health violations. 2 health inspectors showed up during lunch hour, their clipboards in hand, ready to take notes. My heart raced as they walked through the cafe, checking the fridge temperatures, inspecting the kitchen, looking at the cleanliness of the bathrooms. I knew the place was spotless. I had spent hours making sure everything was up to code. But the stress of the inspection weighed heavily on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this, too, was part of their plan. When the inspectors finished, they looked at me and smiled. "Everything checks out," one of them said. "Your cafe is cleaner than many others we've been to." It was a small victory, but it felt like a hollow one. I knew that the complaint had been made on purpose to try and drive customers away, and it wasn't going to stop there. My family wasn't finished with me. They had already made their move, and I knew they would try again. That night after the inspection was over and the cafe had closed, I sat down at the counter with my laptop. I went through the emails, the reviews, the health report, and compiled everything into a folder I called harassment evidence. I had gathered enough to prove that my family wasn't just distant, they were actively trying to sabotage my business. It was a painful realization, but one that was becoming clearer by the day. I had to protect Chapter and Chai at all costs. The next morning, I woke up to find yet another email from my mother. This one was different. She didn't write to congratulate me or offer support. No, this time it was a legal document, a draft agreement for me to fold Chapter and Chai into the family business as we had discussed before. It wasn't just an agreement. It was a contract one that would give them full control over everything. I read it through slowly, my hands shaking. The clause that stood out was the one that required my mother and Bella's approval for every major decision, finances, marketing, and of course the branding. I couldn't believe what I was reading. They were trying to take everything from me. The dream I had fought so hard to build, the space I had poured my soul into it, was all being reduced to a project they could control. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the screen, my mind racing. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't back down now. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked over to the small chalkboard near the counter. On it, I had written a simple quote: "Family doesn't mean control. Boundaries mean love." It was something I had put up weeks ago, a reminder to myself that I was allowed to draw lines, that I didn't have to let my family dictate my life. I took a deep breath, sat back down, and opened a new email. I typed a short, simple message: "I will not sign this agreement. Chapter and Chai is my business, and I will continue to run it independently. If there are any further attempts to interfere, I will take legal action." Before I hit send, I paused for a moment, looking out the window at the street below. The city was waking up, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't just fighting for my cafe anymore. I was fighting for myself. I hit send, then closed my laptop. I had made my decision. I knew the battle wasn't over. The next move was theirs, and I couldn't predict what they'd do next. But one thing was certain: I wasn't backing down. In the weeks that followed, things began to settle in ways I hadn't expected. The threat from my family wasn't over, but I had finally stopped waiting for their approval. I had learned through every confrontation and challenge that my worth wasn't tied to their validation. It had been hard to admit, but it was true. Chapter and Chai had become my sanctuary, my achievement, and the more I poured myself into it, the more I saw its impact on the community around me. The people who came through my doors weren't just customers. They were part of the life I had created, a life that had nothing to do with my family's expectations. A few months after I had sent that final email to my mother, I received an unexpected message from Bella. It wasn't a long letter, but it was the first time she had ever acknowledged what I had built. She apologized, said she'd been wrong, and admitted that she had only acted out of her own insecurity. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was something. For a long time, I had waited for this kind of acknowledgement from her, but when it finally came, it felt less like a victory and more like the closure I had needed. I didn't immediately respond. I wasn't sure if I wanted to open that door just yet, but eventually I did. I sent her a short message acknowledging her apology, but telling her that I needed space to move forward on my own terms. I didn't need her in my business anymore, but I was willing to leave the door open for a relationship if it could be on a healthier foundation. There was still a long road ahead, especially with my mother. She hadn't changed. She hadn't stepped foot into the cafe since the day I had handed her the legal letter. And that was fine. I wasn't angry anymore. I had learned that sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing everything. It comes from letting go. It wasn't easy. It never would be. But I had built a new life, and in doing so, I had found something I hadn't expected to find: peace. A few months later, I was walking back from the farmer's market when I saw my dad sitting outside the cafe. I was surprised to see him there. He had always been quiet, more of a passive presence, but today he was sitting at one of the tables reading a newspaper. His coffee sat on the table untouched. When he saw me, he gave a small, hesitant wave. I walked over. my heart racing in my chest, unsure of what to say. I hadn't heard from him since the last time we spoke, and we hadn't been in touch much before that. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, kiddo," he said, smiling softly. "This place, it's nice." He gestured around at the cafe. "I see what you've done here. I'm proud of you." I stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. A simple thank you felt too small, too inadequate, but it was all I could manage. I sat down across from him, the silence hanging between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt tentative. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you," he said after a long pause. "For a lot of things." He looked at me, his eyes full of regret. "I didn't support you the way I should have." I felt a tightness in my throat, but I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I had let go of the anger. This wasn't about him apologizing for everything. This was about him finally seeing me, seeing what I had done on my own. "It's okay, Dad," I said quietly. "I'm okay." And for the first time, I truly felt like I was. After that, things with my family slowly shifted. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It wasn't a storybook ending where everyone suddenly changed overnight. But it was enough. I had the peace I had always wanted, not from their approval, but from within myself. I had built something that was mine, and that was worth everything. In the months that followed, Chapter and Chai continued to grow. The community surrounding the cafe only deepened. People came for the books, the coffee, and the events, but most of all, they came because it was a space that had something real. It wasn't just a business. It was a place where people could connect, and that felt like everything to me. I knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but I had found a strength in myself that I hadn't known existed. I wasn't just running a cafe, I was living my truth. I wasn't asking for validation anymore. I was the one who had created this, and that was enough. And I realized something as I stood behind the counter one night, looking out at the cafe filled with laughter and conversation. I had finally stopped waiting for my family to define me. I had started living for myself, and in doing so, I had found a love and pride that had nothing to do with anyone else. It was a love I had built from the ground up, brick by brick, in the place I had always dreamed of. If you've ever had to fight for something, whether it's a dream, a space, or even just the right to be seen, don't give up. Sometimes the most important thing is to keep moving forward, even when it feels like no one is looking. Keep building, and in the end, the world will see you for what you've always been: strong, capable, and worthy. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever faced challenges that made you doubt yourself, leave a comment below and let me know how you found the strength to keep going. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us all that we're stronger than we think.